Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another episode of After the Buzzer, the show where I recap the NBA games from the night. Loaded slate of action all the way from around 1 p.m. Eastern, I believe, here on the East Coast, till after midnight. So, a lot of games to talk about, a lot of takeaways. I'm, of course, going to get to all of them. But for a majority of this video, we're going to focus on one team that's been probably the biggest surprise in the NBA so far this season. They're defying all my expectations. They've been great on both sides of the ball, and they've completely turned everything around after being one of the worst teams in the league pretty consistently over the past few years. But before we get into that, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos, and as always, drop me down below your takeaways in the comments. Let's go ahead and kick it off with Rockets versus Nuggets. Before the season, this isn't a game that I would have been particularly interested in. I mean, it's fun, Sengun versus Jokic, two of the NBA's best playmaking big men, a young team that's trying to find their stride facing off against the reigning champs. There's certainly a bit of intrigue, but I wouldn't have anticipated myself being as excited for it as I was going into this game. I picked the Nuggets to win the Western Conference and be the 1 seed, while for the Rockets, I picked them to finish right outside the play-in, I think at like the 12th or 13th spot in the Western Conference. Not because I thought they were bad, but just because I thought the West was stacked, and they were just a really young team that was trying to make a turnaround, and to make the play-in over some of those other squads felt like it was a little bit too early to me. But so far, the Nuggets have, as expected, been one of the best teams in the NBA, and the Rockets are one of the hottest teams in the league going into this game. After losing their first 3 in a row, they had won 5 straight games, playing great on both sides of the basketball, looking like a team that was ready to make the turnaround and then some. And against the Nuggets, they proved themselves even further, defeating Denver despite Jokic having a monster game, 36 points, 21 boards, 11 dimes on 50% shooting. Michael Porter Jr. had 25 points and 10 rebounds. Aaron Gordon had 16, 8, and 5. The Nuggets led for a wide majority of this game, but it didn't matter because the Rockets, when it mattered most in the fourth quarter, clamped up defensively, playing great on Jokic, MPJ, Gordon, no Jamal Murray in this one, but Reggie Jackson was playing well too. They did what they needed to slow the Nuggets offense down enough to the point where the Rockets offense could get a couple of clutch buckets. Sengun was great this entire game. Fred VanVleet continues to hit clutch shot after clutch shot. Jalen Green wasn't great offensively, but he was still impactful in other areas of the ball. And this Rockets team defeats the reigning champions to now move to 6-3, 6 games in a row, currently sitting at 4th place in the Western Conference. It's very early. I don't think the Rockets are going to be sitting here at this point, but it's very clear that the turnaround is here. This is a Rockets team that over the past few seasons under Stephen Silas was never very competitive. They went on ridiculous losing streaks, had awful point margins. Guys looked like they didn't care out there. The defense was non-existent. There was really no offensive system. A lot of people would say that they were playing like AAU basketball out there, it felt like at times. And now in the early going of this season, they look like a completely different team. And it's for a number of reasons. Probably the biggest one is the addition of new head coach Ime Udoka. Like I said, under Stephen Silas, this team just didn't seem to care much. They were developing bad habits, didn't seem to put much effort in on either side of the ball. There was no real system in place. It was a disaster. And I don't know if it's just that Stephen Silas is that rough of a head coach or Ime Udoka is this good of one, but it's night and day. Similar situation with the Sixers in their video where I said if you want proof that coaching matters, watch the Sixers last year under Doc Rivers and watch them now under Nick Nurse. With the Rockets, watch them last year under Stephen Silas and watch them now under Ime Udoka. It is a drastic difference. He has this team completely committed to the defensive end to the point where they're a top 5 defense so far this season. Meanwhile, they're also a top 10 offense, one of very few teams that are top 10 in both categories to begin the year. And I never would have guessed that just taking a look at this team going into the season. For them, it really does start with that high level defense. Like I said, top 5 in the league so far, and it was the big reason why they're able to slow down the Nuggets late in the game. They've been one of the league's best fourth quarter teams because in those moments, they just clamp up. A big part of that has been Dillon Brooks, who came in as a big time acquisition in the offseason, getting one of the most surprising contracts to a lot of people. The Grizzlies said they didn't want him back for any reason. People highly criticized the Rockets for giving him that level of money, and so far he's made them look like geniuses for doing so. Clamping up on the defensive end, which we already knew Dillon Brooks could do. He's been an all-defensive player for a little while now, but he's also doing that while scoring efficiently. He's not taking as many bad shots anymore. He's knocking down his threes at a high level clip. He's looking a lot more like the Dillon Brooks that we saw in FIBA this summer rather than the Dillon Brooks that the Grizzlies didn't really want anymore. It seems like he's found a role here, and he's been the biggest proponent of this Rockets high-level defense. Meanwhile, another addition like Fred VanVleet is competing on that end, which he's always done despite his smaller frame. Alperen Sengun has held his own down low. Jokic had a monster game, 36 points on 50% shooting, but when Sengun was the one guarding him, he did a pretty good job. A lot of times with a guy as good as Jokic, you can play perfect defense and it's not going to matter. And watching that game last night, I thought Sengun did a fantastic job. You also have Tari Eason and Jayshawn Tate, guys that are high energy, just aggressive physical defenders that are going to frustrate the opposing team. Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., other guys of this young core are buying in. They're switching a lot, and it's working. Their rotations have been crisp. This is a team that feels like they really want to be one of those top defenses, and so far it looks like they've got the potential to be one the entire season. Similarly, over on the offensive end, the Rockets are just so much easier to watch this season. They're finally running the offense through Sengun, which people were saying over and over again should be the case last season. Ime Udoka has put that into effect, and he's been great in that role last night against the Nuggets, putting up a typical stat line of his so far this season: 23 points, 8 boards, 5 assists, 1 steal, and 2 blocks. Shooting 50% from the field. He's been great as a post scorer. He's knocking down more mid-range jumpers. Really likes this like one-legged fading jumper that he's hit at a pretty solid rate so far. The playmaking is always great with Sengun too. Half the time passing guys open when they don't even realize they are. When the ball gets to Sengun on a possession, good things are most likely going to happen. He's been their best player so far and has looked like maybe an all-star caliber big to begin this season. Big breakout from him up to this point. Meanwhile, Fred VanVleet has hit countless big shots. It feels like every time they get into a fourth quarter, the other team's making a comeback or the Rockets need to make a late push. Fred is the one that's getting them a clutch bucket. He's knocking down a big three, which I think is some of that veteran championship pedigree that they were looking to bring into this team when they signed him this offseason. Also having him as a playmaker at the point guard spot, finally they have someone who can do that, has been big for the rest of the guys on this team. Dillon Brooks, like I said, has been efficient scoring the ball. Jabari Smith Jr.'s been pretty solid in not the most expansive role. He's not having the big breakout season some people thought he could, but he's been perfectly fine in the role that he's had so far. Jalen Green's had a pretty good start to the year, although did shoot 1 of 13 last night, but it was more of an off game, and he was still impactful in other areas despite not scoring well. Jeff Green, ridiculous 15-point revenge game against the Nuggets last night. He's given them some good moments as a veteran off the bench. This is a team that's just played really well on both sides of the ball. Ime Udoka has been a great head coach, and it's put them in a spot where they look like they could compete for the play-in this year. I'm not thinking they're going to be a top 4 team this whole season. I also don't think they're going to be a top 10 team on both sides of the ball by the end of the year. I just don't think that's super sustainable, but regardless of if they drop a little bit, even if they make just the play-in tournament this year, that's a major success for this Rockets team because they've been one of the worst teams in the entire NBA consistently over the past few years. Worst record after worst record in the Western Conference. No cohesion at all. Felt like guys were just kind of going through the motions out there. It felt like the rebuild wasn't really going anywhere while other young teams were continuously rising, taking the next steps. And now it feels like the Rockets are finally doing that. I'm someone who criticized their offseason. I thought signing Fred VanVleet was a bad decision. I thought Dillon Brooks got probably too much money, although I kind of like the idea of them adding a defensive wing. Still felt like a bit of an overpay, but so far it's paid off really well. Udoka has been a fantastic hire of a head coach. They've been good. They've held their own against some really good teams, just beat the defending champion Denver Nuggets, who even without Jamal Murray have been beating up on teams. This is just a really solid squad out there in Houston. I'm happy for Rockets fans that they're finally getting some competitive basketball that you can actually watch without wanting to turn the game off. I've seen a number of people try to discredit this Rockets team by saying that they're only beating up on injured squads, which, sure, they've played some beat-up teams, the Kings a couple of times without De'Aaron Fox, for example, the Lakers dealing with a number of injuries, the Nuggets most recently without Jamal Murray. Like, they are playing some injured teams, but all you can do in the NBA is play the people that are on your schedule, and also, they're blowing out a lot of these teams that they're facing off against. It's not like they're barely squeaking by teams that are devastated by injuries. They blew out the Kings not once, but twice. The Lakers game was pretty much over by the time it started. They're taking care of business, blowing out teams that, if you're a good team, you should probably beat, which I think is a sign of a good team. So I'm still impressed. I'm not listening to any of that. This is a team that had been awful the past few years. Really, any success this season is a huge bonus for them, and maybe they end up falling down the standings and struggling a little bit as they play healthier competition. But for the time being, I don't think that just because they played injured teams, that's a valid reason to go ahead and tear down what they've done so far, which has been genuinely impressive. This win for the Rockets does end a 7-game homestand for the franchise, so now they've got to go out there on the road. They've got some tough opponents coming up. This is going to be kind of a prove-it stretch for the Rockets, but if they hold their own, if they look anywhere near as good as they did over these past 6 games. We're going to have to talk more seriously about this Rockets team, where they could land in this Western Conference this season that currently feels wide open at this point. So yeah, shout out to Houston. Udoka has been easily the coach of the year up to this point. And hey, maybe I was really wrong about them in this offseason. As for the Nuggets, I don't have too much to say about them in this game, really just that they missed Jamal Murray bad. Their bench was already pretty rough with him in the lineup, and now Reggie Jackson moves to the starting lineup, takes one of their more consistent scorers off the bench out of that potential lineup. They don't have Jamal Murray to step in with the bench unit and run that. They need him back as soon as possible. They're still good without him, but obviously they're not the terrifying force that they usually are with him out there in the lineup. Now let's go ahead and move on to Grizzlies versus Clippers. I made a video about LA a couple of days ago and talked all about how going into this Grizzlies game, they were 0-3 in the James Harden era, getting blown up by the Mavericks, and I said at the end of that section of the video that if they lost the Grizzlies, we were going to have some more serious conversations. And spoiler alert, they lost to the Grizzlies. They were down double digits for a lot of this game. They made a big run at the end and tried to come back, but ultimately fell short to a Grizzlies team that has just now gotten their second win. They're 2-8 on the season after this victory. It's an embarrassing loss for a Clippers team that was at home playing one of the worst teams in the NBA up to this point. I don't really even know what to say about them at this point. One of the big things I noticed is towards the end of this game, when they made that big comeback from being down double digits to tying it up and even taking the lead for a moment, they were using a lineup of Russell Westbrook, Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Paul George, and PJ Tucker. And eventually, they subbed out PJ Tucker in that lineup for Kawhi, who was playing a bit of small ball 5. And it was working. Like, they were getting stops. They were getting buckets. Things felt more cohesive. They were catching up and erasing the lead. And like I said, eventually took a lead of their own. But with a few minutes to go, they went back to kind of their starting lineup. They took Russell Westbrook out, put in James Harden, put in Zubats, and they fell apart after that. James Harden, every time he's out there on the court for the Clippers, they just look worse, whether that's because of him or not because of him. Sometimes I feel like it's because of him because he's not a great defender out there. He's stopping the ball quite a bit. There was one offensive possession in particular where it resulted in a Russ 3 where Harden just caught the ball and stood there at like the free throw line for, it felt like forever, it felt like a lifetime where he was just standing there. A couple guys moved, but overall just nothing was happening. He just threw it over to Russ, took a catch and shoot 3, and it didn't go in. Like, we see possessions like that when Harden's out there. Sometimes it's not his fault. It feels like guys don't really know what to do, when to be aggressive, when to not be when he's on the court. But either way, when Harden's been out there so far, they've looked significantly worse. I don't know why Tyronn Lue went back to him and Zubats at the end of the game when that Russell Westbrook, Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Paul George, Kawhi lineup, like that lineup was playing perfectly well. And I feel like if they kept that group in, they would have ended up winning. Instead, Tyronn Lue makes the decision to go back to James, go back to Zubats, and end up losing this one 0-4 in the Harden era, and now losing to the worst team in the league so far. It's been a disaster to begin this era. If you want to hear me talk more about how bad this Clippers team's been so far, I made, again, a whole video about that recently. You can go check that out. But for right now, I'm just tired of talking about them because I thought this thing was going to be fun, and so far it's been a complete disaster. As for the Grizzlies, Desmond Bane has been fantastic this season. He had 27 points, 4 boards, and 6 assists. Big shot after big shot when the Clippers made that comeback late in this one. He has been really one of the only positives for them so far this season, in a year where it's been, injury after injury and guys not playing super well, and even when they do play well, they get hurt. Desmond Bane has been a consistent force so far. Shout out to him. Me and many others thought he could have a breakthrough while Ja was out, and even though it hasn't resulted in a lot of wins, Desmond Bane has been doing his part. Next, let's go ahead and talk Heat versus Spurs. I haven't talked about this Heat team too much so far this season. They start off 1-4, but now have won 5 straight. They're 6-4 on the year, and a big part of that has been Bam Adebayo. He's the real big takeaway from this game. He was, again, amazing. Put up 24 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 blocks, 50% shooting, and this has been the norm for Bam. Against Atlanta, 26, 17, 4, 2, and 2 on 75% shooting. Against the Grizzlies, 30, 11, 1, 1, and 3. Against the Lakers, 22, 19, and 10. Should have been a 20-20-10 triple-double, but they took away a rebound after the game. He's been the Heat's best player. He's been amazing, looking more aggressive than normal, and I still think he could be more aggressive. I'd like Bam to take even more shots. He's been doing it efficiently, high-level defense. They've needed a lot from him so far, and Bam has stepped up to the challenge. And you might have noticed, but against all those teams, they've had good bigs. Against the Spurs, they've got Zach Collins and Victor Wembanyama. Didn't matter against Atlanta. They've got Nyeka Okongwu and Clint Capella out there. Didn't matter against the Grizzlies. Jaren Jackson, the reigning D-boy. Didn't matter against the Lakers. Anthony Davis. Like, he's consistently outplaying some pretty good big men. Bam has been really underrated so far this season. He's having the best season of his career, and he's kept the Heat afloat and been the biggest reason why they're currently on a 5-game win streak, even though they lost Tyler Hero recently, who had been their best offensive player. Bam has stepped up in his absence and just been phenomenal. He's deserving of a shout out. Also, Duncan Robinson was ridiculous in this one. 26 points, 5 boards, 4 assists. One play where he absolutely cooked Victor Wembanyama, which is going around Twitter because it's ridiculous. But yeah, shout out to the Heat winning 5 straight, turning things around after starting really rough. As for the Spurs, Vic had an 18-point, 11 rebounds, 7 assist game with 7 turnovers. He shot 9 threes, shot 2 of 9 from deep. I don't love how many 3-point shots Vic is taking. Part of it is because he's not really getting the ball ever down low. It's something that me and many other, content creators have been saying. I wish there were better guards to get Vic the ball in better spots. They've been trying this Jeremy Sohan thing at the point guard spot. He hasn't been bad by himself this season, but he's not a point guard. It's not going to work. He doesn't have the playmaking chops to some of those other point forwards that teams have manufactured over the past few years. I just wish they ran Trey Jones out there more as the lead ball handler for Victor Wembanyama, because when those two are on the court, things look a lot better, but I feel like he's being done a disservice in this beginning portion of his career when he could be having much better games and be making a bigger offensive impact. Next, let's go ahead and talk Timberwolves versus Warriors. Minnesota gets another win, continuing to rocket up the Western Conference standings, mainly behind their great defense. Rudy Gobert is unbelievable, again looking like his depoy self, like I said in that Timberwolves video I made recently. Jay McDaniels is a monster. Anthony Edwards holding his own, having another great individual performance of 33 points, 6 boards, and 7 assists. Minnesota looks legit, and Cat's even starting to get things going now. They feel like they've got the chance to be one of the better teams in the West, and I'm annoyed because this is something I called happening last year, and I guess I was just a year too early on the Timberwolves hype train. Meanwhile, for the Warriors in this one, the offense continues to be a big problem because so far it's just been the Steph Curry show this season. Outside of him, not a single Warrior has scored more than 20 points this season. Not Klay Thompson, not Andrew Wiggins, not Chris Paul, not Draymond. Nobody. Only Steph Curry has scored over 20 points in a game so far. That's not a recipe for success. Their offense has just not been clicking. Chris Paul's playmaking has been great, but his scoring isn't there. They don't have a lot of shot creators at the moment. Wiggins has just been awful so far, playing the worst basketball, not just his Warriors tenure, but probably the worst basketball I've ever seen from Andrew Wiggins. It's been bad, and they went from a team that I think started 6-1 or something around that to a team that's right around 500, has fallen below some other teams in the West. They've got to figure something out. There's just not enough creators on this team at the moment. They're relying way too much on Steph. If he at any point misses time with injury, I don't know how they're going to physically win games. Next, let's go ahead and talk Sixers versus Pacers, which is a battle between the two best point guards in the East so far this season, Tyrese Haliburton and Tyrese Maxey. The Tyreses have been dominating the East, and in this one, did exactly that. Maxey puts up 50 points, a career high, 7 boards, 5 assists on 63% shooting, 7 of 11 from 3. He's on an unreal trajectory. Coming into the season, the question was, could he maybe push for an All-Star appearance? And now it feels like he's going to be an All-Star. That's a lock at this point. If the break came around today, he'd be starting in the Eastern Conference. It's more so, could Maxey make an All-NBA team this season? That's how good he's been. Just unbelievable efficiency, the playmaking. Him and Embiid's two-man game is unstoppable. The Pacers just had no answer, not that really anybody has so far this season. And I think the Sixers moved to 8-1 with this win, have been completely unstoppable, not losing since their first game of the year. Meanwhile, for the Pacers, Haliburton, also amazing, 25 points, 17 assists, just an offensive dynamo out there. I made a full video about the Pacers recently if you want to hear me talk more about Tyrese, but overall the Pacers defense just didn't have any answers for Embiid and Maxey, which again, nobody really has so far this season. Finally, last game I'm going to go kind of in depth into, although I don't have too much to say, is Thunder versus Suns. Shea does his typical stuff in a win. 35 points, 7 boards, 4 assists, a steal, and a block. Just ridiculous performance from him as he continues to look the part of an All-NBA player again. Jalen Williams, meanwhile, was kind of the story of the game. While Shea did his typical stuff, J-Dub had 31 points, 1 short of tying his career high, 1 board, 1 assist, and 2 steals on 11 of 16 shooting. Just a masterclass in tough shot making, using his physicality to bully past defenders, finish at the rim at a high level, knock down some threes, play some great defense on Kevin Durant in particular. He's just a machine out there. I think we're going to see more of this from Jalen Williams as the season goes on, as he continues to get towards that breakout season that I personally was expecting from him this year. I think he's going to reach that point to where people are talking about him very clearly as a future All-Star, which I think it's clear that he is. As for the Suns, fourth quarter collapses continue to be kind of the theme for them so far far this season. Against the Thunder, they were up 6 going into the fourth and completely collapsed on the stretch. A lot of it was just good play from the Thunder, but their defense fell off a little bit. The offense completely fell off. It was bad decisions and like lazy turnovers, a lot of just isolation play. It feels like the Suns reach those final 12 minutes and just forget what got them to that point. It's been consistent. It happened against the Thunder. It happened against the Lakers the other night. It happened against the Spurs. Like, it doesn't matter who they're playing. Every time the Suns reach the fourth quarter, I kind of just expect them to somewhat fall apart, which isn't good for a team that's trying to compete for a championship. I know they don't have Devin Booker, and when he comes back, I think it will help, but they should still not be falling apart as often as they are, even with Book not on the court. To wrap things up, let's go ahead and rapid fire these final few games. The Mavericks blow out the Pelicans behind 2 30 pieces, one from Kyrie and one from Luka. A video is probably coming on them very soon. They've been extremely impressive so far. Shout out to the Mavs. The Knicks blow out the Hornets in the first game of the day, despite another great game from LaMelo Ball. He just doesn't have much help at this point. Continued great play from RJ Barrett, who does feel like he's taking a little bit of a leap this season. The Lakers beat the Blazers in a battle of 2 very heavily injured teams. Anthony Davis, in the absence of LeBron, drops 30 points, 13 boards, and 6 assists, continuing his monster season. The Bulls blow out the Pistons behind a 21-12 double-double from Vooch. Detroit falls to 2-9, tied with Memphis and Washington for the lowest win total on the season. And finally, the Nets defeat the Washington Wizards behind 27-13 from Mikal Bridges, who seems like he's finding his rhythm a little bit in this early season. Washington, meanwhile, falls to 2-7 on the year. One shout I do want to give to them is Bilal Coulibaly. Played great in this game. Some tough defense, 20.7 boards, like what I've seen from him throughout the season. Hopefully he gets more minutes. But yeah, with all that being said, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos, and comment down below your thoughts on these games, and most importantly, on the Houston Rockets. Where do you think they finish this season? Do you think this elite defense is going to be maintained the entire year? Will they take a step back? Have you been impressed? Love to hear your thoughts on this Rockets team that is really shocking the NBA so far. And yeah, I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.